Hey you all, welcome back to another episode of The Three Rings, and today we are talking about book bans and what's been happening with the Moms of Liberty group and Ron DeSantis. See, knowledge to me is one of the most amazing things we have as a modern society. As any creature on the planet, our ability to read and write and experience stories and experience histories and experience new ideas is what truly makes us special. So when I see groups like Moms for Liberty or Ron DeSantis trying to ban books, it is upsetting. It is scary to me because the suppression of knowledge generally leads to the suppression of people, groups, minorities, and just not a lot of good ever comes from knowledge suppression. It's really a not great thing, and I want to dive into that in this video. So I made a first cut of this video, but it was a lot more, I think, angry at the fact of what these groups are doing against suppressing knowledge, especially Ron DeSantis. He's been trying to cut and get rid of AP Black History classes in schools in Florida. And these are classes that aren't even required, which I think they should be, because America was built on the backs of African Americans and of the indigenous Americans. So, you know, we need to teach that history. We need to teach the real history of America, the fact that America did horrible things to become the empire it is today. Ron DeSantis want to get rid of these classes because he thinks they're promoting critical race theory, which is basically the idea that racism is systematic, which it is if you study a lot of stuff. I'm currently studying real estate right now. There are literally laws against systematic racism with the Fair Housing Acts. So I think our own system even looks at it and is like, hey, we were being racist. We need to make sure that people aren't doing that, so we're going to do the Fair Housing. Now, obviously, after Fair Housing Acts were passed and that made things better, then credit scores came out. And that's a whole other thing where it's like, hey, you know, you have to have a good credit score now to get a loan. And it's very hard to get a credit card in the first place. And then if you have bad credit or a missed payment or something, which might happen a lot in a lower income community, well then how are you supposed to get a home or an apartment? So a lot of issues, but nonetheless, systematic racism is a thing. That is what critical race theory is teaching, and Ron DeSantis doesn't want white kids to feel bad. The thing is, I don't think these kids taking these AP Black History classes, reading books about Black history, I don't think they're feeling bad for being white. I think if they feel anything, they're like, wow, we shouldn't have done that. I wish we could have been kinder. Unless the kids are obviously like racist children that are not nice. But most kids are going to be like, hey, that wasn't cool. Why didn't more people stand up for them, right? So I don't think it's really the kids that are feeling bad as much as maybe it is the parents. Maybe the parents haven't worked through some of their ideologies and their thoughts around race and other people that are different than them. So I think maybe they don't want to challenge their ideologies. And, you know, if their kids are learning about that stuff, well, now they have to talk about it. Now they have to learn about it as well in conjunction with their children. So Ron DeSantis doing that, I just think it's dangerous because it's erasing such an important part of our history that I think should be more in the forefront. America already tries to hide the fact that it has done bad things, that it has, you know, hurt African American communities, that it has genocided the Native American community. You know, those are things that are not taught enough about or talked enough about in schools, because they don't want people to, I think, be mad at them and realize like, hey, this entire empire that we built was built on blood. It was built on blood and conquering, and you know, that history is already suppressed anyways, and now Ron DeSantis is trying to make a public move to suppress it more, which I think is really dangerous. And again, I don't think these kids are feeling bad. When I started to study more Black history, I believe I read a book called Stamped from the Beginning, and I still have yet to finish it, but I read this book, and it had a lot of heavy material in there, talking about Black history and how America did horrible things to the African American community. And I felt for it. It made me have more empathy for the Black community. It didn't make me feel guilty and bad or want to, you know, hurt myself or think that I'm a horrible person, but made me realize that maybe my ancestors did some really shitty stuff to the Black community. It made me realize that maybe the way my grandparents were brought up, maybe they didn't treat the black community right. So I want to do better. I want to be anti-racist. I want to be someone who uplifts the black community. I want to be someone who uplifts the LGBTQ plus community, right? I want to be someone who uplifts the indigenous community. I want to have conversations with all groups, because learning allows us to empathize, and that is with every group. So Ron DeSantis trying to erase black history is really dangerous when it comes to schools, because now is not allowing these children who may not have known those stories to have empathy or understanding for the black community's struggles. And it's the same with LGBTQ stories. While a lot of parents are upset over the critical race theory, they're also upset about these books that have queer stories. And sometimes these queer books have some sexual, writings in their pages. And I understand somewhat as like, hey, I don't want my kids to read something that's a little more sexually obscene. So these parents that are opposing these book bans, or these parents that are wanting these book bans on LGBTQ plus stories, or these books that might have some more sexual stories in them, could be ignoring the fact that the Bible has the same stories, right? Because I'm guessing some of these Moms for Liberties groups are white evangelicals. So you're going to ignore the fact that the Bible has stories about Lot literally having sex with his daughters, David killing Bathsheba's husband to sleep with Bathsheba, Solomon having thousands of wives for just many reasons, for pleasure, for alliances. Just a lot of bad stuff happens in the Bible. Murder, rape, incest, all of this stuff you don't mind your kids learning about in church, in Sunday school, or in your own home. But when you say it's coming from the school, you're saying, oh, well, the school book has a story about a queer person who was sexually assaulted. And maybe the story is a little more graphic, or maybe the book's about sexual awakening and there is something in there that's sexual. That offends you, but all the stuff in the Bible doesn't. All the really violent and horrific and sexual stories in the Bible don't disturb you or don't make you uncomfortable, because you're only okay with indoctrinating your children if it's you. And in a way, I do understand that, because I want to approach this with empathy, because I can feel myself even getting upset about it, because again, I don't think any book should be banned, whether I agree with it or not. I'm using the Bible example because I come from a Christian background. I was raised conservative Christian, and I read the Bible a lot. I think the Bible is possibly one of the most destructive books in human history. It has led to so much violence. So many people have killed in the name of Christianity, have burnt history in the name of Christianity. We have Paul the Apostle in Ephesus burning thousands of magic scrolls that could have contained so much knowledge, just burnt because he said they were sinful, and the people burned them. There's so much knowledge we lose from book burnings from the past, from the Library of Alexandria getting destroyed. I don't know if that had to do, I don't know what that had to do with. I think that was just like war. That had nothing to do with Christianity. But the loss of knowledge is, I think, it's a really scary thing. And I think it's something that should be free. Even though I myself think the Bible's a destructive book, you have every right to read it. You have every right to believe it, even because it's a religious text. And I want you to have that. I think if someone reads the Quran or the Vedas or any religious text, they have the right to believe it. They have the right to see what those stories have to tell and the right to learn from them. Even though I think the Bible is destructive, I also think it has important stories. Jesus had some good ideas, just like every other spiritual guru has had great ideas throughout history. So when these parents want to ban these books, I want to say to those parents, please look at yourselves and maybe realize where you might be being hypocritical. Because for me, this is what it seems like. You only want your children to read stories and read histories that conform to your worldview. But the beautiful thing about being human and being one of the smartest creatures on this planet that has built societies, spaceships, boats, who has cured diseases. Humans are incredible. Knowledge is meant to be learned. It's meant to be absorbed. And it's because of the reading of a ton of books, maybe a good book, maybe a bad book, maybe a book you liked, maybe a book you hated. Learning from those books, whether you agree with them or not, is important because it allows you to form and shape ideas. And for me, it seems like you only want your children to be having ideas of heteronormative relationships and Christianity in their head, and not anything to do with the queer community or the black community or any other community, the indigenous community. Because you want to perpetuate maybe the idea of your community's superiority. I don't think these parents actually are meaningfully doing this. I really don't think some people are outright being like, oh, we need to stay superior. I don't think it is that. I do think there are some people like that, 100%. There are far-right groups that are very scary. But I do think it is this ideology that you want to perpetuate a certain idea in your children. You want to indoctrinate them. Church is indoctrination. But the thing is the great thing about education in school is you learn. Yeah, maybe a teacher is trying to help open your kid's mind to new ideas. And I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I think it's great that we challenge our ideas. It's great that we challenge our minds. It's great to be wrong sometimes. It's okay to be wrong. I think, being wrong is a good thing. It's important to challenge our views, and why it is hard. And trust me, I know it's hard. I had to challenge my views of Christianity and come to terms with the fact that what I believed in, I didn't agree with anymore. Deconstructing my faith was one of the hardest things I've done, and it took me a few years. It took me like 2 years of just starting to think and doubt and then readjust and then doubt some more and then read something or listen to someone's experience about deconstructing their faith. It took me a while, and I know it's a hard thing to do, and I know maybe you don't want to deal with that. Maybe you're afraid, and I understand. It's hard to come to terms with being wrong sometimes. And I'm not saying that I'm completely right? I know that I have more leftist ideals, and there's policies and things I want to change. I don't think all of my ideas are going to be the best ideas. I don't think they're going to be all the right ideas, but I just want to see a better world for us all. So when we see these book bans, right, that are coming from the Moms of Liberty group, coming from Ron DeSantis, number one, it's inflammatory to get their base of voters, especially for Ron DeSantis, not so much Moms for Liberty because they're a group, but Ron DeSantis pushing these book bans, he's doing it to also really, I think, make people vote for him in this upcoming election because he's running for president, right? He's appealing to his base, which is the Moms for Liberty group. So it's a political move, 100%, and it's meant to divide us more. And that's why I had to refilm this, because my first video was a little too divisive. I wasn't holding as much empathy as I should have been for the people who want the book bans, right? But I want you to consider this if you are someone on that side who doesn't want their children reading these books. And, the thing is, most of these books that have the sexually obscene stuff in them, for the LGBTQ plus books, the queer books, these are books that are for high school kids. In my experience, I was already reading and seeing sexually obscene things on the internet by the time I was 12, of my own volition, of my own terms and research, because as a human being, as an adult, as you grow up and you start to sexually awaken, you look those things up, and these book bans, to me, it's kind of stupid to ban these books because your kids, if they really want to read these stories, will get them online. If they're trying to find something to relate to, maybe your child is trying to find their identity, their sexuality, they're going to find it online as well. And I think it's important that your school has books that can make them feel safe, has places that make them feel safe. And I think it's important that you make them feel safe. And so, kids are already going to look stuff up online anyway, right? They're already going to find things online if they're trying to be like sexually active or awaken sexually, whether it's on a porn website, whether it's fan fiction, whether it's Wattpad or anything, or a smut book from the local library, not a school library, just a library, or a friend, or a comic book. They will find something that might awaken something in them. That's just a part of life. It's a part of growing up. It's a part of becoming a human. I wish parents, and I'm really thankful for my parents, why they weren't as open about the sexual conversations just because we were raised conservative Christian. They just didn't really think about it. They did allow me to have a lot of different ideas and to experiment with different things and be like, hey, if it's wrong, you're going to come back to what's right anyway. So just do it and you'll figure it out. That freedom from my mom and dad was literally so important. They always gave me the freedom to question what I believed. And that led me to not being a Christian anymore. And my parents still are. My dad is a pastor. And I still love my parents. I have a great relationship with them. Giving your children the freedom to read what they want to read, whether it's in school, the library, online, or whatever, and having an open dialogue with them, I think, from the perspective of being a former child, is a great thing, and it's so freeing to have that kind of relationship with your parents. I don't have kids, so I don't completely understand all the thoughts or emotions that might be going through your brain if you are a parent. But, please, if you are on the side of these book bans, please reconsider, because book banning, I think, can lead to book burning. And book burning can lead to the death of people. We have seen the past where bans on books and book burnings led to the genociding of an entire culture almost. The Jewish people suffered so much in Germany under the Nazi rule. And it started with book burnings. On a college campus, there was a professor of sexuality, and he was a Jewish professor. And I think his curriculum was more on sexuality and some more out there ideas for the 1930s. And they burnt all of his books. And that was a little bit before they started taking the Jewish people to the concentration camps. Knowledge getting erased is a tactic by empires to erase people's cultures, to erase people's histories, to erase something they can connect to. And it's so important if you are a person in the LGBTQ plus community to have content, to have books, to have movies, films, stories that you can relate to, especially if you're trying to find yourself. It's important to find a community and to feel safe with that community. So the far right attacking these books, attacking Black history, attacking queer stories, is scary because they want to take away any power that those communities have. They want to erase the foundation of those communities. They want to fracture people's beliefs even more because they want power. And power doesn't have to be a bad thing, but the power they don't want to use for good. And if we look through the history books of our own history and we look in just popular films, it's the bad guys who put the bans on things. It's the bad guys who, burn books, who destroy histories, and who are trying to suppress knowledge. I don't think America wants to be remembered as a nation that is suppressing its own people. America already has a very, very bad history of genociding and oppressing people. We don't need to do that any further. We don't need to become a fascist country. And I do believe that book burning, suppression of knowledge, lack of access to knowledge, we saw this under Reagan, where college campuses here in California used to be free, and then Reagan made them not free because he saw that the college students were protesting the war. So he correlated, these highly educated students are protesting the war, so let's get rid of free education so that they can't go to college to avoid the war and to be educated. And also more people of color were getting into colleges as well. So, Reagan didn't want that either. So, knowledge suppression, gatekeeping knowledge, gatekeeping schools by making them expensive have always been tactics of fascist regimes. We saw it with Reagan, we've seen it with Nazi Germany, and we're seeing it now with Ron DeSantis and the Moms for Liberty group. So please, let's not do that. So I'm urging people, let's be tolerant. I don't agree with every book out there, and I'm sure you don't either. I have a little book library at my cafe job. It's a take a book, leave a book library. If someone leaves a book that is the Bible, I am not going to get rid of it. If someone leaves a book on Satanism, I'm not going to get rid of it. If someone leaves a book on Donald Trump, I would be very tempted to get rid of it. I won't. It deserves to be there. People can read whatever they want. People are smart enough to come up with their own ideas and to think. But having those ideas available is what's important, whether you agree with them or not. So how do we combat these book bans? How do we combat the suppression of knowledge? Well, number one, we can talk about it. We can make videos, we can raise awareness. We can also start book clubs, book groups. We can start book readings online. You can make videos about history and all kinds of stuff. The internet is an amazing place where we can come together as a community and talk about these things. But we can also come together as a community in our own communities and read books, share stories, and try to understand. Also, visiting local museums, maybe a Native American museum in your area. Here in California, I think we have the Chumash museums, which are really cool, that I have yet to go to, that look amazing. You look up history, research it, read books of your own volition, and find knowledge, and share that knowledge. So what we can do is continually educate ourselves, talk about it with each other, and raise awareness. We can protest these things publicly, we can protest them online, and we can come together as a community. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was very important for me to talk about this because I love knowledge so much. Reading is one of my favorite things to do. So when a group tries to ban books, ban knowledge, something I think everyone should have access to, just like freedom of religion and freedom of press, it is so important that our knowledge is there for us to grasp. And why these aren't broad book bans where they're banning the books entirely, they're just banning them in schools, I do think it could lead to bigger book bans. It could lead to bigger things, bigger culture wars than it needs to be. We don't need those wars at all. We don't need that division at all. We need to unite against the people that are making our lives unaffordable, that are hurting us, and those are the people that are in power right now. We need to get important things like term limits on these senators. We need to lower our cost of living for people. We need to make sure housing is affordable. But they want us to be distracted by hating each other. And they want to erase certain people's histories because they want to ignore the fact that they did bad stuff in the past as a group of people in the power. And we cannot let that slide. We must hold our government accountable, and we must hold each other accountable, and we must continue to educate ourselves. But it is so important for us to come together as a community to stand against these book bans and to make sure knowledge is free for all of us to access. Because while these book bans aren't broad, they aren't big book bans yet, they're just in schools and they're in those places, still banning classes and banning books or getting rid of them does impact things, because those are things those kids aren't learning now, and those kids become adults, and now those kids will lack the empathy that they could have learned from a Black history class about what the Black community went through or what the Indigenous community went through. So it is very important. It is very important to have these classes, to have these books available, so that we can have better empathy for each other, so that we're not divided, so that we can unite. Because when we are united and strong, guess what? That's when the people in power, the elites, the people who are manipulating the way our lives are, ran, and making it harder for us to just live a good life, when we're divided, they have more power. But when we're united with each other and a common want for the betterment of all humankind, that's when we are a force to be reckoned with. I love you all. I will see you next time. This is Gabriel. Peace.